Why, yes, I did actually put a knitting book on my baby registry. Hey there, Fiber Junkies! Welcome back to the Color Cauldron. I'm Johanna, the owner and dyer behind Potion Yarns and host of this podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to talk about some things that I have been working on in my knitting adventures this week. Last week we took off. The month of June was super crazy for me. I was traveling to 3 different shows in 3 weekends, plus working at the hair salon still. If you're a new viewer, also I'm juggling being pregnant for the first time with all of that. So yeah, it's been a little hectic and crazy around the dye dungeons this last month. So now that we're finally through all of those shows, I am very much looking forward to having a little bit more time to just kind of focus on restocking online, getting ready for a trunk show I have coming up in August, and hopefully getting my life a little bit back to normal. And for those of you who have been asking, thank you so much for caring enough to ask, but I am doing really well. I am in my second trimester. I'm actually 24 weeks this weekend, so I'm over the halfway hump, but still got a ways to go. My first trimester, I had a ton of exhaustion. I had some other symptoms too, but the biggest one for me was exhaustion and anxiety, like peaked crazy amounts. And so I am doing a lot better in the second trimester. I have heard the third trimester is a little bit rougher, so I'm gearing up for that. But yeah, I'm pretty excited about everything overall. So I wanted to go ahead and share with you guys some projects that I have had on the needles this week and show you what I've been working on. The first thing I have showed on the podcast before, I've made a lot of progress on it, but I'm still not quite done, and that is my Doodler Shawl by Stephen West. And I apologize, I'm in the middle of a very long row on circular needles, so it is like a crescent-shaped shawl. So you knit back and forth in rows, but I use a circular needle because you have to accommodate hundreds of stitches at a time, and I'm right in the middle of a row. So it's all bunched up on the needles. But my Doodler Shawl is humming right along. I've finished the main body wedges here, and then there's this kind of cable-y part up at the top, and then I am now working on the bottom edging with the third color. I finally got to introduce the third color, which I was really excited about. And it's so funny that I happened to pick these 3 colors up and put them together because I just loved each of the colors individually, and I'd seen them each individually and loved them. But when I was walking around a yarn store holding these and a couple other skeins that I was thinking about buying, I just happened to look down and see these 3 together and was like, oh my god, they're perfect together. I need to put these in a project. I didn't know what project, didn't know what they were going to become, but I knew something special. And then I also noticed right away that they were the 3 primary colors on the color wheel. So I've got blue, yellow, and this is like a pinky red, but still it's basically red. So blue, yellow, and red, the 3 primary colors, which is why they look so fantastic together. So I'm really enjoying that. But these are all from Hedgehog Fibers, and it is actually my first time knitting with Hedgehog yarn was on this shawl. So I am enjoying it. I will say I love the colors that Hedgehog Fibers dyes. She is an amazingly talented indie dyer, a larger indie dyer, but she is based out of Ireland, so already has a little bit of my heart because of that. And she's just really, her color sense is amazing. Her skeins are absolutely gorgeous. And I do really love the colors, which is what drew me to her yarns in the first place. This is the first time that I've worked with her yarns though, and I have to say her sock yarn, which is the yellow and blue yarns that I'm using in there, are her sock base. I am not a fan, and I'm really bummed to have to admit that because I think her colors are stunning. But I don't love her sock base. I'm not sure if I would buy it again because it's extremely splitty. I'm having, and I've worked with splitty yarns before, and I know some tricks to kind of keep that at bay, but I'm having a lot of trouble with the splitting, and it feels not as soft as I'm used to in sock yarns, and it doesn't have a very high nylon content either. I think it's only 15% nylon content, so I'm not exactly sure why it's so or why it feels more ropey. That's the best way I can think to describe it. Is it's not like it's not soft at all, but it's definitely not as soft as a lot of the yarns that I'm used to working with from other indie dyers and the ones that I dye myself. And between the really bad splittiness and feeling like it's kind of a ropey texture and not like a softer texture, I'm not loving it. So I'm very disappointed in the base, but the colors are phenomenal. And then the red pink yarn that I'm using of hers, which is called Sorry, that yarn is her single ply. So it's a merino wool single ply, and her single ply I'm loving, actually. I'm not a huge fan of single ply. Usually I tend to kind of avoid it because it can be so delicate and it pills so easily, and you have to be really careful what projects you put it with. But I knew when I bought these 3 colors, I didn't know what they were going to be, but I knew they would be some kind of a shawl. And shawls are one of the things that I actually do love to use single ply for. I find it drapes really beautifully and it blooms really beautifully in the wash, and it's not something that usually gets a ton of abrasion or a ton of wear like sweaters or socks. So I don't mind using a single ply for that as much. And I do really love her single ply. I feel like it's soft and like a little bit fluffy, but it's not super fuzzy like some single plies that I work with, and so I really like that. So I do recommend her single ply, but I'm not a fan of her sock. Bummer. However, I love the pattern by Stephen West. I'm really enjoying it. I will save the rest of my comments about the pattern for when I'm all finished with you or finished with it, and then I'll tell you what I think about it. But let's go ahead and move on to my next project. So I recently announced on the podcast that I was going to try knitting my very first thing that I've cast on for our upcoming baby. We are expecting our son in October, which is crazy to me. It's going so fast. And so I showed some yarn that I just dyed. This is a brand new colorway. It doesn't even have a name yet. That's how new it is. And I've only dyed it on a couple skeins of this sport weight yarn. It's not in the shop. I've never had sport weight in the shop before, so I'm really looking forward to introducing some in the future, but I don't know that it's going to be something I can keep all the time in the shop just because I don't get a lot of requests for it. So I'm going to try to like kind of slowly introduce it, kind of see how it does, etc. But that'll be coming up probably this fall. In the meantime, I love this color, but I don't, and I will be dyeing more of it on other bases, but I don't have it in the shop yet. But it's this really gorgeous emerald and forest green kind of semi-solid. And I picked this color, I dyed this color up fresh, specifically for our baby project because we're doing a woodland forest theme nursery. And I know that's not like the most unusual and creative nursery theme ever, but I was trying to go with something that would be easy enough to find stuff that would look good with it for people who want to purchase or make gifts. I have a lot of very crafty people in my family who wanted to make me baby gifts, and I knew that I needed something that they would be able to find supplies and patterns and stuff and make things relatively easily. So something super obscure was going to be really difficult, and my husband is not a big fan of branded things. So like we enjoy the Harry Potter movies, but we don't like anything that says like Harry Potter or Hogwarts on it, you know? General like fantasy things, like wizardy like things are fine, but anything that like has a brand on it we're not really into. So Tim Burton stuff like Nightmare Before Christmas and all of those were things we thought about, but we just didn't want like the branded stuff. So we ended up going with the forest theme back before we knew that we were having a boy too, because we figured it could be boy or girl that way. And there's a whole bunch of other reasons we chose it, but we really like the idea. So I'm knitting this really lovely green sleep sack, and there's going to also be a little matching hat. My only concern is I just started it, so I haven't gotten very far yet, but it's a knit and purl pattern, so you've got these little columns of knit stitches offset by like reverse stockinette, and then there's these little moss stitch triangles and diamonds throughout the pattern of the sleep sack. And yes, this is the sleep sack. It's the newborn size, but it's super stretchy yarn. So I am on gauge, and it is going to be, I think it should be the right size unless we have a gargantuan baby, which I don't anticipate. But if not, I guess I'll give it to somebody else. But I'm trying to decide if I like it. I'm worried that the stitches are a little too obscured by how dark the color is. The sample pattern that she had, or the sample she had knit up on the pattern, was kind of a light beigey brown or like a tan color, and I wanted something a little more foresty, but now I'm not sure that I'm loving this. So I can't decide. I'm thinking about knitting it a little bit further down just to see how the pattern develops before I make a decision for sure, but I might end up having to rip this out and dye up some more. Hi, Phoebe. Before I am able to complete this, which is a super, super big bummer because I love this color and I really wanted to do it. And I don't want to just pick a new pattern because this pattern was gifted to me by a friend who's a designer, Kristy LaBour. You can find her stuff on Ravelry. But I really like the little sleep sack and hat set that she gifted me. It was a baby gift for me to knit something for the new baby. And I thought that was super sweet of her. And I really love the pattern and how it looks. I just want to make sure that it's not lost. And the thing is, I could, even if it's a little subtle, I could go ahead and knit it up and still be warm and cozy and look great and be a pretty color and have some nice like feeling texture. But I kind of don't know if I want to lose the look of it, you know? So I don't know. I'm on the fence about that. And I'm notorious for not knitting gauge swatches, so that is why I did not realize that this yarn would be too dark. And I specifically told my husband when we were talking about what colors I should do it in, I was like, we can't do anything too dark, like black or a dark chocolate brown is out, because that will be too dark and it will obscure the stitch pattern. And he's like, okay. And then we both like separately decided that emerald green was the way to go, and then we talked about it and we're like, oh, you think that too? Great. So it seemed like the perfect choice, but now I think it's maybe a little too dark. But I think I'm going to knit it a little further and see how it goes. We'll see. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you think. Should I rip it out and try something lighter? And if so, what color? Or should I just soldier on and make it work, and I can always knit another one in another color later? Let me know what you think. The next thing that I'm doing is I cast on a new sock pattern. Yay! I'm notorious for having multiple projects going, but I'm also feeling like I kind of need to focus on some stuff right now, and I don't really want to cast on too many more things at the moment. But I decided I needed a small traveling project. Even though the sleep sack travels fairly well, I wanted something even just a little bit simpler. And I already had this yarn caked up that I dyed a while back, and I really wanted to knit it. And I had shown it on the podcast months ago, actually, because I was planning to knit a hat, a little like slouchy hat and fingerless mitt set from Pom Pom magazine. And so several months ago I showed that on the podcast, and I said this yarn is going to be this set, whatever. I'd been planning that for months and I still hadn't cast it on. And I found it the other day and was like, oh gosh, I need to do that. And I decided to take it to the shows that I was in recently and cast it on there. And I got to one of the shows and I pulled it out of my bag and was like, I'm going to cast this hat on while I'm sitting here in my booth waiting for people to come in. And I started the cast on and I began knitting the ribbing, and I only got a couple rounds in before I was like, okay, this yarn is way more blue of a gray. It's a gray color, but it's way more of a blue gray than I had at first thought. And I thought it was just the lighting at the show at first. So I put it in my bag and pulled out like the sleep sack, and that's when I started my sleep sack. And I started knitting that instead. And I was like, you know what, I'll look at it at home in the natural light. You know, it was indoors, fluorescent lighting, whatever. I got it home and I looked at it and was like, holy crap, this is a lot more blue than I realized. I thought this was like maybe a tinge of blue, but it was a pretty neutral gray. And the more I looked at it, I mean, it's not blue, but my eye was picking up so much more blue than I had remembered seeing before. And I was like, I think the more that I look at the pattern that I was thinking about casting on, the more I wanted it to be either a straight neutral or even like a warm gray. And so I was like, you know what, I think I'm going to try dyeing some more colors later on to make this at a later date, because I just really, really love, I really want it to be the right color. I don't want to waste this yarn on something that I just don't think I'm going to like, and I really don't think I'm going to like it. So it probably would have been fine, but I also just wasn't feeling that pattern in the moment, and the more I looked at it, the more I thought these would make excellent socks. So this is my Dragonfly BFL base, which is not always in the shop, and I don't think it's going to be in the shop a whole lot in the future. It's just going to be sporadic. It's not one of my mainstay bases. But I do really like it. It's a sock yarn that is 75% superwash blueface Leicester wool and 25% nylon. It is a smooth 4-ply texture, and it's really great for socks, fingerless gloves. You can definitely use it for sweaters and things like that, but because of the high nylon content, it's best for things that get a lot of abrasion, like socks. and gloves or something like that, or leg warmers, those kinds of things. And although it doesn't feel, I mean, it feels nice and soft. It doesn't feel like coarse or anything, but it's not quite as soft as some of my other yarns. And it definitely takes the dyes differently than like a superwash merino would, which I kind of love. I love the difference in the wool bases. So I decided to do a sock pattern, and after much searching, because I didn't have any on the front of my brain that I was like, oh, I've been wanting to knit this. So I didn't really know what I was going to do, and after much searching, I decided to pick a pattern out of this book called The Joy of Socks. I picked this up at Half Price Books a while ago, and I haven't knit anything out of it yet. So I decided now was the time to break it in. So I'm knitting a pair called Soulmates, and this is the picture right here. Hopefully you can see those. It's kind of nice bluish semi-solid. And basically they have these little triangles up the back of the leg, and then the front is just like, it's called a seated rib, but it's kind of like a textured rib pattern all around the rest of the sock. So there's just this one panel of like cable-y triangles and diamonds, and then the rest is just like a fairly basic textured rib. And I was really feeling like with a nice gray yarn, I wanted something very basic and classic. I was leaning towards cables or twisted stitches or possibly even just straight up ribs. But I wanted something a little more exciting than just a plain vanilla sock or a plain ribbed sock. So this was the perfect combination of some interesting things on the back, but then the rest of it is pretty simple, like pretty classic looking, not too flashy. I think it's gonna look really fab in the gray yarn. So I only just started this after I got home from the show last weekend. So I only started it a couple days ago, and I haven't been, obviously I've had other projects, so I haven't been knitting on it consistently, but I'm just starting the little cable twists down here after the cuff. And these are cuff down socks, which I tend to prefer to do my socks toe up, and I know I could rewrite the pattern, but I'm already actually jiggering with the pattern some, because the unfortunate thing about this book is not all of the patterns offer, in fact I think most of the patterns are knit for only one size. A couple of them have multiple sizes, but a lot of them only are written for one size. And typically when things are written for just one size when it comes to socks, my feet are too small or narrow for them. So I have learned that with my particular knitting gauge over the years, I know based on what needle size I'm using approximately how many stitches, and I know like a range of stitches, like anything between this number and this number I can cast on and it'll fit pretty well. And anything below that is too tight, anything above that is too big and loose. And my problem is I tend to knit socks too loosely, so I definitely have to be careful to stay within that frame. And the pattern is written definitely much too large for my feet. Even in pregnancy, yes, my feet are not swelling yet. I'm so grateful for that. I know it's probably coming, especially since I'm on my feet a lot. But so far, my feet haven't changed size and are not swelling. So yeah, I had to jigger the numbers a little bit, and thankfully this is a simple enough pattern that I am able to still keep the back chart the same number of stitches and just adjust stitches the rest of the way around. So about 3/4 of the sock is the seated rib, and it was pretty easy to play with the numbers a little bit there. And I have altered sock patterns enough before in the past. I feel confident that I can turn the heel okay, as long as I just pay attention and take plenty of notes, because I am knitting them one at a time, which is another thing. We'll see how I do. I tend to prefer to knit them 2 at a time, but sometimes it's just too much to keep track of, and I was already like rewriting a pattern, and I already had this caked up, and I didn't want to make another cake, and I'm just lazy is basically what I'm saying. I'm just lazy, let's be honest. Okay, so that's what I've been knitting on. Like I said, I have the Sold Out in a Crop that I'm also working on, but honestly I haven't worked on it in about 2 weeks, so I'll just pick that up again one of these days and show it to you in the future. I have some very exciting news. I am gonna take my very first spinning class. I'm so excited. So I have mentioned this on the podcast before, but I've never done any spinning on the podcast. I learned how to spin on a drop spindle, technically learned, like, oh gosh, was it 2 years? I think it was just 2 years ago, which sounds like, oh, you should be pretty good by now, right? Nope, not at all. I'm actually really not good. And largely that's because I don't practice consistently. I'll work on it like hardcore for a couple of days to a week and then put it down and not pick it up again for like 2 months. That's just how I roll sometimes. And I love drop spindling so much, but I have yet to knit anything with the yarns that I've produced. I haven't even done that many, like even just like half skeins, much less a full skein of yarn. But the ones that I have done, I have not actually done anything with. They're just sitting around in all their lumpy, early beginning art yarn spinning phase glory. And I have not done anything with them. I don't know if I ever will or if I'll just keep them as souvenirs to look back on when hopefully someday I'm proficient and amazing and I can look back at them and smile fondly. But I'm also not the type to collect sentimental souvenirs that don't have any meaning like that. So I have a feeling that if they don't get used up in the next couple years, they're gonna get donated or tossed. But we'll see. We'll see how I feel. So anyways, I learned on the drop spindle a couple years ago. Not super good, but I do enjoy playing around with it from time to time. And then I have always wanted to learn on a wheel. Even before I ever learned on a drop spindle, I used to not want to spin wool at all. And then after I started dyeing yarn, I was just immersed in the fiber world much more than I ever had been before. And I started getting this itch to try dyeing spinning fiber. And I was like, well, if I dye it, I kind of want to try it too. And being around it and around people who loved it and were spinning beautiful things all the time made me really want to try. So when I got cornered by a very persuasive salesman at a fiber event who was drop spindling as a demo, and he offered to teach me in 5 minutes, I was all about it. But I really wanted to learn on a wheel. Unfortunately, wheels are quite expensive and they do take up some room, although there are a lot of ones that fold up and or are pretty upright and small and portable. So if I ever get a wheel, I'm definitely looking into one of the small ones that doesn't take up a lot of space, because I don't have a lot of space in my house. But I still haven't gotten to try a wheel, mostly because at the beginning I didn't want to try one. I just didn't have a lot of money or space, like I said, and so I was afraid that if I tried a wheel, then I'd really want one. But I had the opportunity to sign up for a spinning class in Lawrence at the Yarn Barn, which if you're a local person, you will probably recognize that name. It's a really big knitting and wool supply store in Lawrence, Kansas. And I've never taken any classes there before, so I'm really excited. I actually don't take very many classes in fiber arts at all. I typically am more of a self-taught knitter or taught using YouTube or just having like a friend sit down and show me something and then I just trial and error it until I figure it out. And so I've only taken like a couple classes in my whole life having to do with fiber arts, and I'm really excited because we're taking beginning spinning and they're going to have a little bit of drop spindling at the very beginning, just the basics. And since I never learned it in an actual class, I'm sure I will benefit from more practice and some tips and tricks. And then the rest of the day is going to be spent on wheels and learning how to spin on a wheel, spinning some fiber, trying out a couple of different kinds of wheels. I'm probably not going to be able to afford a wheel anytime in the near future, so I am a little worried that going to this class is going to just put the hankering in me to get a wheel and then I won't be able to afford one, especially with a new baby on the way. But I had the opportunity and I was really excited and I thought, you know what, let's just go for it. And then you never know. I hear about great stories from other people all the time about just stumbling upon a gently used wheel on Ravelry or eBay or in your local community or something, and that can happen to me. You never know. If not, it'll just be a fun skill that I have, and maybe someday, years down the road, I'll be able to afford a spinning wheel. But I'm sure it could help my knowledge and my skill set, and you know, maybe I'll just rent one every now and then too, or see if I can borrow one or something like that. This is kind of a sad story about being a yarn dyer, and more importantly, about not being in a hurry and why you should take your time when you're winding your yarn. So I wind a lot of yarn, probably mostly because I knit a lot, but also because now that I'm a yarn dyer, sometimes I'm rescanning yarn that gets tangled in the wash. Most of my skeins I don't reskein, but I do reskein at my discretion depending on how tangled they get in the wash or if I think they need it or something. But I do offer a caking service in my online shop as well. It is an additional fee. It's $2 per skein to have it caked, but if you pay for that extra caking fee in your order when you check out, I will cake up your yarn and ship it to you caked so that as soon as you open it up in the mail, you can get get it right onto your hook or needles, and get going right away. It's really, really fun, and it's really nice for people who don't have the equipment to cake up their yarn at home themselves, or who just don't have the time or the energy or physical ability or whatever else. So I do like to offer that service. And recently I had a customer who ordered some of my beatnik yarn, which is a colorway that I did for my Atomic Age collection a couple months ago, and she wanted it caked. So I actually had several orders I was caking yarn up for all on the same day. So I just turned on some Netflix and was sitting there caking up yarn, and it was going pretty quickly, but I was kind of in a little bit of a hurry. I wasn't paying super close attention, and I was kind of just like over it and not feeling it at all. So I kind of had a bit of a bad attitude. And I unfurled the skein, and I leave usually, I always have at least one tie, but I usually try to leave 2 ties on the skein, sometimes 3. And you have to clip the ties off with scissors before you can cake it up. Otherwise it's all like tied up and you can't cake it. So I went to go, after several skeins already caked, I went to go clip it, and I clipped the first one, no problem, and I went to clip the second one, and I grabbed it in a hurry, and I went, and I'd grabbed a couple of extra strings from the whole thing, and I was not being careful. I'm usually so careful when I do it. I was not being careful, and I just cut right through like 3 or 4 strands of the skein. Now, I could have just tied a knot in it and sent it to her, but I am not that kind of person. Industry standard is, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4 knots, but I think it's 3, maybe 4 knots per hank of 100 gram. A 100 gram hank of yarn is industry standard of what's acceptable to sell as a skein. I personally try to err on the side of caution. I don't think I've ever sent one out with more than 2, and I'm not even sure I've ever sent one out with 2. I think I've only sent them out with 1. And only on very rare occasions, because the supplier I get from is very reputable and they usually don't have any knots in their hanks, and I try not to put any in. Usually if I find one or if I create one myself, I'll usually just keep it for me and send them a different one. But yeah, I definitely couldn't send this one because it would have had multiple knots. So thankfully I already had some extra skeins that were not sold sitting around in my inventory of the exact same colorway and base. So I just grabbed another one, caked it up much more carefully, and shipped it to her. So no worries on that end. It was a near disaster, but thankfully I had extra stock. However, obviously I'm not going to throw that yarn out. You can totally use it, right? But I didn't know what to do with it. So I have caked it up. This is one skein. I did tie this one together a couple times, and then I got lazy towards the end and was like, I'm just going to make a mini skein. So I have some beatnik on my sparkle base Seductress sock, which is a gorgeous colorway. I am really happy that this happened on a colorway I happen to personally love, if that was the case, because I know I'll use it for something. But I'm trying to figure out what I should use it for. I have used this color in my What the Fade shawl with several other colors, so I've already made it into a multicolor shawl before, although I could make it into another one. I could put it with something else and put it in a sweater or something, but I'm kind of leaning towards making socks or possibly some fingerless gloves. I think I like the sock idea though, maybe socks and a matching hat if I have enough. But yeah, I don't know what to do with it. So I'm gonna have to figure out some patterns, look up some fun things to do with it. It's a fairly busy yarn too, so I can't have any like really intricate stitches because there's a lot of speckles and some big swaths of color, which in socks, in that small circumference of socks, will probably pool a little bit. So I don't want it to be super busy because I want it to mostly show off the colorway of the yarn, not the intricacy of the stitches. But I definitely want to do something fun with it, so I guess if you have an idea for what I should do with my beatnik sparkle sock yarn, let me know. Alright guys, that is about all I have for you this week. Just some things that I'm working on and some things coming up, but I will be touching base with you guys again next week. So definitely join in on the fun, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to give this video a big old thumbs up. And don't forget to share it with your friends and family who enjoy fiber or any kind of creative endeavors. We love having more people join us over here in the Fiber Junkie family. Everyone is welcome as long as you're kind, and we just have a really good time. So please, 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 please share this video with your knitting groups and knitting friends and your yarn-obsessed friends. We would love to have more people join us over here in the Color Cauldron. Have a great rest of your week. It is now time to cast off. Love you.